Welcome back to the Asia Economic Dialogue 2021. I extend a warm welcome to all of you for our second session. The theme for this session is Global Finance in a Post-COVID-19 World. This session will be chaired by Mr. K.V. Kamath, who was formerly president of the New Development Bank, as well as the former chairman of ICICI Bank and Infosys Limited, two of India's leading companies. Mr. Kamath started his career with ICICI in project finance and also went on to work with the Asian Development Bank in Manila. He took over as Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at ICICI in May 1996. Mr. Kamath was conferred the Padma Bhushan, one of India's highest civilian honors, in 2008. He has been president of the Confederation of Indian Industry, India's Apex Industry Association, and a co-chair of the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos. Our esteemed panelists for today's session are Ms. Manuela Ferro, who is Vice President, Operations Policy and Country Services of the World Bank. She oversees the World Bank's corporate policies on financing and analytical services. A Portuguese national, Ms. Ferro has over 25 years of hands-on and leadership experience in Africa, Europe, Latin America and the Caribbean, the Middle East and North Africa, and South Asia. An economist and an engineer by training, Ms. Ferro has previously served as Director for Poverty Reduction and Economic Management in the Middle East and North Africa, where she oversaw the team of economists and governance specialists. Most recently, she served as the World Bank's Director of Strategy and Operations for Latin America and the Caribbean, overseeing the operational and analytical work in this region over the past 3 years. Mr. Shixin Chen is the Vice President, Operations 1 of the Asian Development Bank. He is responsible for operations in the South Asia Department and the Central and West Asia Department. Prior to joining the ADB, Mr. Chen headed the Department of International Economic and Finance Cooperation at the Ministry of Finance of the People's Republic of China. Mr. Chen held senior positions in the Ministry of Finance of the PRC, overseeing areas of public finance and partnerships with multilateral development banks. He was a board director in the ADB's Trust Fund Credit Guarantee and Investment Facility from 2012 to 2014. He was executive director for PRC at the World Bank from 2013 to 2016, and a board director for the PRC in the New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank from 2016 to 2018. Sir Danny Alexander, who is Vice President and Corporate Secretary of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. He is a member of the Executive Committee with responsibility for governance and the bank's relations with its shareholders, Board of Governors, and Board of Directors. He leads works on the bank's relations with the host country, high-level relationships with other shareholders, developing the bank's culture, and the digital transformation of the AIIB. From 2010 to 2015, he served as a senior cabinet minister in the UK Treasury, during which time he was responsible for the post-crisis fiscal consolidation program of the UK government. He was Member of Parliament for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch, and Strathspey from 2005 to 2015. Sir Danny is also a distinguished visiting professor at Tsinghua University's School of Public Policy and Management. Over to you, Mr. Kamath.
Thank you, and good evening to my fellow panelists and to all of everybody on this live forum, as it were. Indeed, we have a very topical subject, and we have very experienced professionals from multilateral institutions around the world to share their thoughts on this subject. I will start by giving you a few comments of my own before we head into the subject proper. To me, experiencing the challenges that we have gone through, what primarily comes to mind is that we have had a reset of the mind. And this reset of the mind happened last year, around March in India. In China, probably it happened a little earlier. And in other countries, it happened sometime during the course of the early part of last year. This reset of the mind has impacted us in a variety of ways, primarily in the way we, I think, do business. And some of the outcomes have been very interesting. In the Indian context itself, when I talk to people from Indian, say, industry. If you look at the manufacturing front, basically what comes to mind is fairly significant productivity increases. At the shop floor level, productivity increases of around 25% is probably what has been observed, depending on the industry, but certainly between 10 to 25%, depending on what industry we are talking about. And this, indeed, if you look at in the Indian context, Q2 and Q3, you have seen the bottom lines becoming significantly stronger compared to on a year-on-year basis. Almost a 25 to 30% improvement in the EBITDA level, and the same sort of improvement at the net profit level. Of course, we all have new ways of working, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will share with the audience as to how they are going about it, because I think most all panelists are working basically from home the course of the last year. I think work from home is just one part of, I would say, the nature of work that has changed over the last year. The other being a huge increase in the way we work in the digital context. I will probably paraphrase it to say that we are at the start of what I can term a new digital super cycle. And I'm sure we will touch on it as we go along, which could, again, accelerate global growth as we go along, apart from the normal drivers of economic momentum. Lastly, I think what, again, would be interesting to hear from around the world is how do we see repair and going ahead, as it were, in an economic context in the next year and the coming year. In India, it has been a very pleasant surprise that from Q2 itself, the Indian Q2, which ends October, and the Indian Q3, which ended in December of the last year, growth has come back pretty strongly. After Q1, that is the April-June quarter, which was a very poor quarter. And just today, we had Moody's say that they have revised their outlook for the economy for the coming year from a growth of around 10% to a growth of almost 14%, 13.7% to be precise. So there are a wide range of things that are happening around us. And we thought that it would probably be most efficient if you look at this on four broad, I would say, heads, spread over four rounds, as it were. The first is economic damage, assessment of that damage against what was anticipated. Because we had a mindset as to what could have happened last March. How is in reality that worked out? This could be at the country level, institution level, the firm level, or the individual level. That's round one. Round two is progress of recovery. We are, I think, into recovery in most countries. What has been the progress? And what have been the outcomes? And I would dare say unexpected positive outcomes, centering around everything digital, as I mentioned, improvement in efficiencies, the rise of the e-economy, and the virtual workspace. Round three, I think my fellow panelists explore what needs to be done further and the time frame for doing this. How will countries deal with increased deficits? What impact will withdrawal of stimulus have on developed and developing countries? And indeed, there could be job losses and the need for reskilling of people to find productive employment in this new world. And round four, the last round, we could assess the response from the financial system to date and what needs to be done further in this context. I remember that a year back, the heads of the multilateral development banks had gotten together and talked about the likelihood of broken balance sheets, both in the financial sector and in the corporate sector. As this happened, how is repair progressing, and how will we drive growth going forward? For round one, we will have Mr. Ferro talk first, and then we'll have Mr. Chen, and then Sir Danny. And the round two, it will be Chen, Danny, and Manuela. And then after we will go in that order as we go along. So I think without much ado, Again, thank you all for being with us today. And I will request Ms. Ferro to address the round one topics. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to all. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. It's a great pleasure to join this distinguished panel here today. We are indeed living extraordinary times. We had decades of strong, sustained progress, but we now, in fact, see a risk of losing terrain at the global level. Of course, the World Bank Group works around the world, and we see the effects of this pandemic really playing out differently in different regions. But if you take the overall damage done so far, we see that the global economy has contracted by about 4.3% in the past calendar year. And with the exception of China, emerging market developing economies contracted on the whole by 5%. That is very significant. Now, what drives much of this contraction are in fact necessary public health and public policy measures that governments had to implement to contain the pandemic. And we see that across the world, the economies that are dependent on tourism, on services more generally, but also commodity exporters suffered the most. In East Asia, we saw regional growth contract slightly less than the overall contraction to about 0.9% growth. You still had growth in East Asia, but this is really the lowest rate of growth since 1967. So a pretty significant slowdown. And if you look across the world to all developing countries and probably developed countries too, per capita incomes fell in 90% of the world. So we see the pandemic really reversing the downward trend in global poverty that we had seen over the past generation, really. And at a minimum, we will see over 100 million people being pushed into extreme poverty. This is really the poverty level below which almost survival is in danger. Now, we see these prospects for recovery and poverty reduction being affected by the pandemic in three channels. One is dampened public and private investment due to a deterioration in confidence. We see erosion in gains in human capital, education, health, due to problems in access to education. You talked about digital education, but the truth is that a lot of the developing world doesn't even have electricity. And so the revolution that we saw in some countries with digitalization and virtual learning cannot happen across the board in all countries because simple access to electricity is not there for everybody. We see long-term health effects from the pandemic. Even those that recover from COVID may in fact sustain longer-term health effects. And we have people that have prolonged spells of unemployment and may actually step out of the labor force for a while. There's also a discussion about potential long-term productivity growth, but we can talk a bit more about that because I think there's also some silver linings on potential sources of productivity growth. On the real sector side, we see corporate debt overhangs. We see balance sheets that can turn into bankruptcies. We see loss of entrepreneurial capital, and we see financial sectors that could afterwards see an impact through rising non-performing loans and subsequent capital erosions. On the sovereign side, on the government side, governments, of course, have taken a double hit, have taken a hit from the tax side. They're not receiving as much tax revenues from both businesses and households because economic activity is down. but they're also having to spend more. And they're having to spend more on health, but also on social protection to keep households and livelihoods afloat. And this, of course, when you look at debt and you look at the growth rates, in a way, there's a big concern about debt sustainability around the world in developed and developing countries. But in developing countries, of course, the ability to recover is larger. And so we see government debt increasing. Only last year, government debt in emerging market development economies increased by 9 percentage points. This is extremely large increase in debt. So this requires concerted, determined action so that the pandemic is brought under control first, but that also that these economies can reopen and recover safely and with confidence. Let me stop here and hand it back over to you, Kamath.
Thank you. That was very comprehensive, Manuela. Thank you very much. Can we have Mr. Chen go next, please?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kamath. So nice to see you again. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Very delighted to join the very distinguished panel for this discussion. Yeah, maybe let me just confine to the Asia because Ms. Ferro gave us the whole picture of the global situation. Definitely, this is the once a century pandemic, so we could not expected like moderate impact. I do agree the impact damage is significant. So maybe I like to quickly just focus on 4 areas in Asia, the pictures like this. First of all, we do see the GDP, remittance, trade, FDI, huge losses here in the past period of time after the pandemic. For instance, 2020 in Asia, the GDP lost about 6% to 9.5%. Remittance fell about 20%, so it's huge. And FDI declined about 40%. South Asia had the bigger hit. So I think mainly because India had the prolonged lockdown. But more important is that the hardest hit economies are those the small tourist-dependent economies. Those have been hit very significantly, such as like Maldives. More than 60% of their GDP related to the tourism. So we do see this region. This is the first contraction in 6 decades. So this is very, very significant. The second one I like to mention is the poverty. The global poverty actually fell back to almost the 2017 level. I think it's about 9.4%. Supposed to be, if there is no COVID, could be 7.9%. So that means the 4 years effort of poverty reduction has been written off. According to the World Bank's estimate, it's about more than 100 million people fell back into extreme poverty. According to our, in Asia, our estimate, the pre-pandemic poverty, extreme poverty line, the population is about 114 million, 3% of the population. So at this moment, additional 7 to 8 million added into the extreme poverty because of the COVID. So if we calculate that, it's almost 70% poverty increase happened in Asia. So we can see how the big challenge in terms of the poverty. I really like to mention that. The third point is the public deficit, public debt, and the fiscal deficit is also quite significant. In Asia and the Pacific, the average public debt reached to 52.7% in 2020. We can see the 2019, it's about 43%. So 43.9%. So we can see the significant increase there. The problem is that almost all the developing Asian countries are under very tough budget pressures. So this is will affect how the countries the ability to respond to the COVID and to put the efforts in economic recovery. Finally, I like to also highlight the non-performance loans, NPLs, in the banking sector. I think it's also really something there we have to pay attention to. Yeah, as we know, before the COVID, actually it's already been tripled from 2019 to 2009 to 2019, 4.7% of the total gross loans. But after the pandemic, I think we do see specifically emerging economy NPL rise faster, 2.5 times increased. So rising NPLs in the banking sector is going to be the major risk in the financial system. So maybe because of the problem of balance of sheet health, capacity of lending, and also maybe some risk for the major lenders might be withdrawn from the region. So those are the major areas I like to take this chance to put on the table to mention it. With that, I pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chen. So Danny, could we have your thoughts, please?
Thank you, President Kamath. Very good to be here, and congratulations to the Pune International Center for organizing this series of events and discussions, and it's a pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel. That said, having listened to Ms. Ferro and Mr. Chen, I'm not sure there's that much left for me to add, but nonetheless, let me try. Of course, the picture in terms of the economic statistics that have been presented is one that I fully share and recognize in terms of the impacts on falling GDP and living standards, investment, the reversal in the consistent fall in poverty over many years that we've seen, and the impact, especially on extreme poverty, is a factor that we see in many parts of Asia and the world. And then the increases in public debt and the longer term challenges of debt sustainability that presents are also key factors, especially in many developing countries in Asia. And all of those present challenges for public finances, for individuals, for households, and for firms, as Mr. Chen was also saying. From the AIB's perspective, obviously, we're an institution that's focused very much on investing in infrastructure projects in Asia and beyond. And we see also impacts in the infrastructure sector, which also have potentially long-term consequences. Falls in infrastructure investment, naturally, when many places are in lockdown or have restrictions, then the ability to carry on with the construction of infrastructure projects is significantly hampered when people cannot travel or go to work. Then we see, all over the region, especially in the most severe periods, project delays, but also the risk that when public finances are squeezed and governments rightly have to prioritize the immediate welfare of their people, that's potentially important, even transformative long-term investments can be deprioritized simply of necessity. And certainly for AIB, I think in common with the World Bank and ADB, much of the need that we've sought to finance through our crisis recovery facility has been budget support loans to help maintain the budgets of governments, rather than specific infrastructure project finance at this stage, because that's just simply not so much where the demand is, and that's something also which has long-term consequences. And then think it is very important also to go back to what Manuela Ferro said about also the impacts on children and young people. In recessions throughout history, you sadly see scarring effects on a generation who's most affected, perhaps that which is emerging into the labour market. But I think in this case, because schooling has been disrupted for hundreds of millions of children around the world, for those who are fortunate enough to have that opportunity, then the risk is that unless that educational shortfall can be remedied in future years, that will have a longer term impact on those individuals, on their families, and on their economic prospects. And so it's not only the economic statistics and the poverty statistics, but also the life chances of people that are directly affected by this crisis, which is where the kind of investments and projects that all of us are involved in financing, I think, can become really important. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I find all my fellow panelists are on the same page. The damage is severe, and the pain also is severe. I think I'm hearing the numbers of people going or slipping back to poverty for the first time in a global context. And thank you for putting that number. That number, 100 million, that I think is indeed something that we'll all need to work on. We also hear that there could be lasting health damage that could be one of the residues of this disease that has hit us. Let us go on to round 2, which is progress of recovery. And I will request Mr. Chen to lead the discussions this time around, and then Danny will come in, and then Ferro will come in.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kamath. Yes, in my Chinese philosophy, we're also talking about any crisis always combined with the opportunities. So this is kind of opportunities. I do like to mention this. We do see the positive progress during the crisis. I also like to briefly highlight 3 of them. First of that, I think the swiftness and the magnitude of the international cooperation. So I think this is really something around there during the past year. I think we've done even better than that during the global financial crisis, 2008. For instance, all IFIs expanded their balance sheets immediately. IMF, we see IMF, World Bank, AED, AIIB, among others. For instance, ADB, we April 13, board quickly approved the 20 billion package. And December, we also approved the 9 billion package for the vaccines. So we can see that. I think others as well. So this is the one. Second, I also like to mention the multilateral coordination on the vaccine is also the incredible. For instance, the COVAX is an excellent example. This is a multilateral collaboration to supporting the developing country. And I do believe this kind of efforts will have the long-term impact for the future, how the world coordinate with each other when global facing the crisis. Second thing I like to mention, as Danny mentioned before, health and the social system have gained the momentum in the past year. So we all know health and the social sector is the long-lasting bottlenecks in our developing world, but this time it's kind of completely different. So major resources has been put into health and social sectors. So all the areas, capacity building, hospital, doctor, nurses, testing centers, and medical equipment. For the social sector as well, I think the social protection network been strengthened significantly. We hope this trend could be continued in the future. The third area I do like to mention, as Kamath, you mentioned, the digitalization. We see the digital sector performance quite well, and is bringing the transformational impact. We do think like that. People's behavior norm change, and we also created a different way of doing business. For instance, real-time data in trade, supply chain, and the procurement, and the different way of learning, specifically remote education and the training been there. And also I'd like to mention digitalization has the huge potential in the future. Last year, Asia digital platform revenue was about 1.8 trillion US dollar. It's about 8% of GDP. So if we think about a 20% increase in the global yearly output, then there will be increase about, in the digital, there should be 4.3 trillion of the global yearly output there. It's about 5% of GDP. So we can see that. And also global e-commerce revenue, we think maybe will increase about 25% in 2020. We are waiting for the figure. And we estimated maybe will increase 22% in 2021, this year. Specifically in Asia, has the largest share of B2C and the retail e-commerce market. It's about 4 trillion US dollar, about 18% of GDP. So this is a kind of, but I also like to highlight we need to manage the risk of the digitalization. For instance, many areas, for instance, the region's e-readiness varies considerably. Digital divide also would lead to a rising of inequality. We see the rural area, the kids cannot access the internet as well. And also maybe tax-based erosions, and also profit shifting maybe will getting worse. So this is some area for the policy making. We have to careful and monitor that, and also manage this risk. So to support the digitalization in the economy. With that, I pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen. So Danny, you have your views, please.
Thank you. When I was in the Chief Secretary to the Treasury of the UK government between 2010 and 2015, we were working to try and repair the damage from the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And we believed then that was, or we hoped at least, that would be the most severe crisis we would see in our lifetimes. But frankly, it's dwarfed by the breadth and complexity and multifaceted nature of the challenge that this crisis poses. And so in terms of looking for areas to think about in terms of the recovery, I mean, I would very much agree with what Chen Shixin said about multilateral cooperation, or at least cooperation among multilateral institutions. Perhaps intergovernmental cooperation has not been as strong as it was in 2008 to 2010, but among multilateral institutions, there's been a very good cooperation, and both on investment, on crisis support. AIB has co-financed multiple projects with both the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank in this context, and that's extremely valuable. And likewise, we're seeing the same on vaccine delivery. I think one would have to say that the speed of development of effective vaccines has been a really a great success for science, and shows the changes in the way that science has developed. That's one positive lesson from this, that we can innovate and develop solutions quickly. I think also the increased focus on the social sector, on the health sector, as something which is not only important for human lives, but also hugely important for economic development. I mean, you cannot but fail to see that is a critical interdependency from the way in which this crisis has unfolded. And I think that will change investments and patterns. And talking to finance ministers, they're much more interested in talking to their health minister colleagues than perhaps they were in the normal times. And so that's a change, and I think one for the better. Likewise, you do see the importance, at least, of digital infrastructure and of digital technology in the ways in which many places have been able to deal with the crisis. You know, where there is good digital technology that's enabled business, education, healthcare, and pandemic and virus control to be much more effective. And I think it poses a challenge, which Mr. Chen, I think, rightly highlighted, which is that in Asia especially, we see very deep digital divides, both between societies and within societies, between urban and rural areas. You see gender imbalances. In Asia, only 26% of the rural population has access to broadband, and women are 10% less likely to own a cell phone. And with this gap growing to 28% in South Asia. And I think that if this crisis also encourages a focus on how to bridge those divides and an understanding of the need to focus on, you know, the infrastructure for tomorrow, the infrastructure that societies will need in the coming decades, particularly technology and digital infrastructure, then that will also be something which will, you know, allow perhaps a stronger recovery to take place and to catch up some of the damage that has undoubtedly been done over the last year or so. Thank you.
Thank you. Ferro.
I am now faced with the same challenge that Danny and had in the last intervention, which is to complement. But I actually think we're very aligned in our analysis of both the challenges, but the silver linings, the unexpected positive outcomes, but also what this pandemic has reminded us all, which is we are a smaller world than we thought we were, and we are all connected through global public goods and global public bads that we need to address together. And so let me start with what we think that would be critical to reopen economies with confidence. Sorry. The first, and here very much agree with the point just made, one of the first positive outcomes of this pandemic has been the speed at which public and private resources and talents, scientific, universities, pharmaceuticals, and governments came together to find in record time a vaccine for this, or a set of vaccines for this pandemic. This is going to be critical for the reopening. And now it's really getting these vaccines through the approval channels and capacity to supply the whole world, not just one part of the world, the whole world. And because we cannot contain this pandemic within the borders of a country, and global trade is fortunately an important driver of the recovery, we will need to do it across the world. The second point that I think is important is that we're all discovering sources of productivity, of creativity, and hopefully of new ways of delivering goods and services in particular. And on the services side, I would want to highlight long distance education, long distance health, but also the highlighted points of digitalization requires sometimes very basic needs like stable, reliable electricity around the world, requires a minimum of digital skills and some equipment. And all of this is, as was highlighted, not really available across the world. The other thing that I think this pandemic helped remind us of is there are other global public goods and bads that we need to address together. And those relate to climate change, both adaptation and mitigation, and relate to the ability of building societies and economies that are less affected by shocks. And those shocks can be of a pandemic nature, but they can also be of an economic nature and natural disasters, which we see around the world, really eroding large stocks of physical and human capital. So the opportunity to reset policies and institutions for an economic recovery that is fast and that is more resilient requires two actions. First, health, and this vaccination campaign and production and scaling up of capacity of vaccine production around the world, and delivery. Delivery is not simple. The world has never done a massive vaccination campaign as we are aiming to do right now. That is really critical. Most countries, most developed countries, let's start, used a portfolio approach to acquire vaccines. They didn't just buy from one place. They actually made contracts with many places. And at a time when supply is limited, very limited, this makes absolute sense. And many developing countries are actually doing the same. They're trying to maximize their opportunities to get a vaccine that is safe and effective as early as possible. It's probably the best investment a government can make right now. Second, I think on accelerating the digital economy and its foundations, both digital literacy, even basic literacy, and electricity access and broadband. These are all areas that I think we all need to invest in, knowing that that different parts of the world start from very different places. And the last point that I wanted to make in this area is that I think the point on collaboration, this response also highlights the importance of identifying both comparative advantages, learning from each other, and joining forces where possible. These are one of the things that we're finding in responding is that aligning standards, ways of working is very needed. And each institution, each of our institutions has a different starting point in terms of responding to a crisis like this or doing development work. But we need to find ways to collaborate that are low cost. And I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress in that direction. And from the World Bank side, we work almost every day with the colleagues from the institutions joining us today. So I'll stop here and hand it back to you, President.
Thank you. Thank you. And to me, this has been a learning experience, this round in particular. And I'll just pick some phrases which truly epitomize what you're saying. Small world, but a cooperative world, a collaborative world, an innovative world. But at the same time, I think some red flags. There is a digital divide, and pain could be uneven across this world. And we need to then look at how do we make sure that we build checks and balances so that we do not have these shocks in the future, whether it is in the context of disease or whether it's in the context of climate. So a whole range of topics, which I think all of us need to ponder on, the governments or institutions or corporates as we go along. Round 3 and round 4, in probably due to better utilized time, and I know that Ms. Ferro has a hard stop in 20 minutes. So what I'm going to suggest is the next round will be led by Sedani, but we will combine, if it's okay with you, round 3 and round 4, and we can go probably 7 or 8 minutes each, so that we can finish this round in time for Ferro to go to our next meeting. Because both of them, round 3 and round 4, have to do with what is to be done further in the context of the economy as well as the context of the system. So why don't I ask Sedani lead this round, please? Thank you.
Thank you, President Kamath, and I will try my best to cover some of the material, but leave plenty of others for the other panelists to try and avoid the same problems. I mean, part of the question in round 3 is about what needs to be done and timeframes, and then what needs to be done over the longer term. I guess I'd make a couple of points there. I mean, obviously, most of the world is not out of the immediate crisis, though it's to be hoped that the vaccination program will enable that to happen. And so obviously, the most immediate short-term priority has to be to maximizing the speed and efficacy of the delivery of vaccines in the developing world as well as the developed world. And that's an enormous challenge for all of our institutions and for governments and societies around the world. But it seems in most places that's really the principal method that will allow lockdowns and other measures to be reduced, and therefore allow some kind of normality to return to economic and public and social life. And so, working together with the established mechanisms like COVAX, for example, to get the vaccine to people and provide finance where it's necessary for low-income countries to gain access to the vaccines is a critical priority, and one where I'm sure each of our institutions will be collaborating closely with the others to ensure that we, between us, with our different mandates and roles, provide the finance that is required in many parts of the world to enable that to happen. Because a world in which some parts of the world are vaccinated and others are not is not one that will be able to get back to full economic life. This has to be something which is rolled out in the developing world as much as in the developed world to be truly effective from an economic reopening point of view. Secondly, I think the point that Manuela made is a very important one, that there are lessons to be learned about handling crises and preparing for crises and thinking and planning ahead. And we can see one major global crisis coming towards us already, having impacts, and that's climate change. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic should also make us reflect on that, because actually, whilst one can't draw a direct connection with climate change, clearly the interaction and perhaps the unhealthy interaction between humans and the environment is one of the common features. And there is a human-driven element to the changes in that space, which make pandemics like this something which is a greater risk, and obviously which is driving climate change. And if it's left unchecked, it will have dramatic impacts, especially in the developing world, and especially in Asia, where there are large numbers of people living in coastal cities, and where water resources, for example, are extremely challenged. And so I think that there's a phrase which is often used, which I think can sound a bit trite, but also has I think in this context real meaning, that people want to build back better, is relevant in the sense that as we invest in the things that our members, developing countries in Asia will need in the coming decades, thinking about infrastructure which is climate resilient, thinking about investing in infrastructure which can help to reduce carbon emissions, as we see more ambitious targets for decarbonization, not only in the developed world, but in the developing world as well. We see in Asia now many countries, including here in China, setting targets for going to zero carbon. Actually, investing in infrastructure and digital technology, which helps to ensure that the as it were, the recovery that we're building is also one which is resilient to future challenges, seems to me to be incredibly important. For AIB, We've set a target that we want by 2025, 50% of our investment to be climate change focused. So, and all the other MDBs have set similar ambitious goals, and this year we'll see possibly virtual, but many international discussions with the COP26 in the autumn, biodiversity discussions, UN biodiversity discussions hosted in China. Those are important opportunities for countries around the world to redouble their commitments in those areas. So I think if we look at healthcare investment, we look at climate change related investment, technology and digital, which we've discussed, all of those are critical areas, both for the recovery and for building a more sustainable world in the longer term, but one which also enables the crucial needs of economic development to continue to be met in the developing world. In terms of the assessment of the response from the financial system, I would just say that for our institutions, I think, and certainly for AIB, we see an increasing focus on private sector investment being needed in the years to come. Both simply in terms of the impact you make, if you can mobilize and crowd in more private sector investment, then you're going to have more impact on the development in achieving the development objectives that we have, but also some private sector entities are impaired in the approach that they can take because of the crisis, and those issues will have to be resolved. I've dodged the issue of how governments will deal with their fiscal deficits, and I know that I'm running out of time, so I'll leave that to others. But I hope those observations are helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. I think that puts a lot of things in context. Ms. Ferro, would you like to touch on these issues, please?
Thank you very much. And perhaps I'll leave for our last colleague the fiscal deficits question. But let me start by saying that I think that what has been a good lesson from the response to this crisis is that I think that most governments around the world recognized it as something that required early, determined action. And from the development community and from an international development architecture, I think most institutions did too. From the World Bank Group side, this has been our fastest and largest response yet. I too was on a corporate job during 2008. We thought we were fast, but this is a very different crisis. It's a crisis that has its roots in the real economy. And therefore, a monetary stimulus or a pure finance solution will not solve it. It has to be embedded in the real response. The other thing that is unusual with it is it's a response that leads from the health sector, which again is unusual. It usually comes in the banking sector, it comes on the macro side. This one is from health and it's from livelihoods. And so our response on the bank side has really led with health. Held with the first wave really before vaccines, anticipating potentially vaccines coming, but really being about supporting the health preparedness and response in health units, PPE acquisition, all of those preparation of governments to respond on the health side. The second area, which still absorbs a significant amount of our financing, is really supporting households with so many families having lost jobs and livelihoods. Governments have had to support them through safety nets, cash transfers, and other unemployment benefits, those kinds of mechanisms. Those are important, but they're also extremely expensive for governments to finance, and we've helped them do so. The third bucket is support to firms. we can actually lose firms that are going to be necessary for the recovery. So where possible and where firms are viable, we have helped governments try to shape programs that help firms delay tax payments, delay some of their obligations, stay afloat, maintain some employment, maintain some employees on the roster, and be able to restart when there's a safe reopening, which of course varies widely around the world. The last bucket of areas where we are supporting governments is really to finance the response, so really fiscal support, but also to introduce policy and institutional reforms to generate new jobs in an economy that is more resilient, that is greener, that helps transition to a lower carbon footprint, and that is more inclusive as well, because we talked about the divides that this pandemic has exposed: digital, economic, social access. So we've moved quite fast. We are making available $160 billion of financing for our developing country clients for a period that started in April of last year until June of this year. So far, we've already deployed $83 billion, and more than half, significantly more than half, is for COVID response, which we are blending with the long-term development program. In supporting, for example, vaccines, we are not just doing an emergency project, we're trying to blend that with strengthening health systems for the future. We have a very strong presence around the world with a global footprint in terms of staffing that is quite significant. This has really helped. If we had been flying out of Washington or a hub, we wouldn't have been able to do what we are doing. And we are discussing with our shareholders increasing resources for the poorest countries. That's where we provide either grants or very concessional long-term financing for countries to help address this crisis. Now, of course, our support is not limited to financing. The World Bank Group actually has a very significant presence on the analytical and advisory side. And that's where connecting ourselves to, for example, the vaccine market, manufacturers, COVAX, African Union Initiative for Vaccines, all of those partnerships are proving very, very useful, as is this dialogue, for example, today. No institution alone can support this, this recovery. So I really welcome this dialogue also because it's another way of exchanging information and thinking about how aligned we are in this response. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ferro. We also realize that you have a hard stop in 7 minutes. So if anytime you need to go on to your board meeting, we will miss you, but we will understand. And I want to thank you in advance, because I may not have an opportunity at the end of the session when I'm formally thanking others to thank you. So thank you for being with us. But do be with us, and you will, I'm sure, leave in your next meeting. I move on to Mr. Chen. Could we have your thoughts, please?
Okay, thank you. And now it's my turn. I will try to not overlap with my other colleagues talking. Maybe the first thing I like to just say a few words about the deficit issues, how the countries, because deficit there, and will deal with the increased deficit. I think at this moment we are facing the dilemma. On the one hand, the countries need to spend more on fighting the COVID, on the economic recovery. But on the other hand, they are under the bigger pressure of a deficit. So this is kind of a dilemma at this moment. I think maybe a couple of ideas here. First of all, because we're still in the forest, so we actually need to maintain a certain level of debt. And by the time, so we still maybe this year and next year will gradually get rid of the COVID. Then we buy sometimes of the certain level of the deficit. So second, maybe it's necessary to spend on what are essential. So I think this is very much important. We have to help the people, specifically the vulnerable groups. They are able to put the food on the table for their kids, for their family. And also we need to support the vaccination, strengthen the health capacity and the social protection as well. All the job-related activities we need to support. And also Danny mentioned that maybe in the middle and the longer term, infrastructure is also the very key in Asia. We have to support them. But I think I like to highlight is more important is the structural reforms. I think structural reforms could be a fundamental way of the game change. For instance, how to support our developing countries to mobilize domestic resources. So as like in South Asia, most of them, the tax to GDP ratio is lower than 15%. So it's a very long-lasting problem. And also capital market is also the major way of mobilize domestic resources. So this is something there we need to help them. At this moment, ADB is preparing to set up the regional hub, focus on domestic resources mobilization and also international tax cooperation. So with the sense to set the platform so all the developing Asian development member countries can join together, policy dialogue, and also the international tax coordination. I think those is quite important. Secondly, I also want to say a few words. You mentioned maybe how to think about the withdrawal of the stimulus. Maybe stimulus withdrawal, I think, will be inevitably sometimes in terms of the time frame. But I think the timing is critical. At this moment, we have to learn some lessons from 2008 global financial crisis. Withdraw too early maybe will cost a prolonged recovery. So this time we have to learn some lessons from that. And also the policy coordination, I think, would be extremely important, specifically the central banks coordination, the major central banks coordination. So the policy not surprise the market and also cause some failure. So maybe stimulus normalization need to be carefully assessed and also depend on the multiple elements. So COVID situation, the CPI or other indicators may be taken into consideration. Yeah. My third point relates to what you mentioned, that job. What's the main driver for the new jobs? Maybe just quickly 3 points. First of all, it's not only about the new jobs, but more about the job opportunities for the vulnerable groups, for the informal sector, for the SMEs. And also digitalization, as we discussed, has huge potential of the job creation. In addition to that, climate change financing is also the area of the job creation. Comparing with the fossil fuel, I think investing in renewable energy can create about 2.8 times more jobs. Yeah, so this is the new way of doing that. Finally, I just want to have a few words about the financial system's response to the pandemic. I think many Asia countries put great efforts on that, specifically the central banks, like using the direct asset purchase to inject the liquidity, expanding long maturities and deferring the loan payments, without any penalties, specifically for those areas like tourism, hotel, transport, international trade, and small business. And also revolving the loan to support the working capital. That's extremely for the private sector. So those areas are extremely important. But here I like to just say a few words about next step. You're asking for this. I think maybe two aspects could be essential. First one is no matter how big challenges ahead, we need to ensure the adequate liquidity and the sustained market confidence there. So I think this is a very important part there. The second part is that we need to shape our policy to ensure a healthy financial system. So this is pretty much important. We need to support the mobilized domestic financial resources. At this moment, I also like to mention ADB is supporting Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. So those developing members to strengthen their capital market and developing the vibrant local currency bond markets. I think those will be helpful. And also promote monetary and fiscal policy coordination. So this is also very much important. For those areas, those countries that have a possible fiscal space, maybe fiscal policy can take more responsibility. Finally, strengthen the regional financial cooperation. I think ASEAN +3 has a very good practice. So other sub-regions like South Asia, Central West, and the GMS area could also try the best for this. So let me pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen. Again, I took a lot of takeaways from this round. I'll briefly put that in the frame, as it were. Clearly, we're talking of cooperation amongst various nations on a variety of fronts. We're talking of the health sector, the need to get vaccination done at speed, the need to always keep climate change in focus, build a resilient infra. The stress on sustainability is coming through loud and clear from all participating institutions. The stress on the private sector is also coming through very clearly. The focus on households, apart from firms, households as, again, the vulnerable part of the household population. The need to continue with fiscal stimulus, the need to continue with the liquidity in the system, and clearly the need to make sure that we address the challenge of lost jobs and maybe reskilling as required. Again, we talked earlier on it would be enduring pain, which we will need to be prepared for. A digital divide, which we should try and avoid. And the need for continued cooperation, whether it is at national level, at the regional level, or at the global level. I think to me, these are the essential takeaways. I think the sharing of thoughts has been very useful. We have had perspectives from the three institutions. There are a lot of, I would say, commonalities in this, but each one of my co-panelists have brought out what is unique from their own perspective. For example, Danny mentioned about 50% of AIB's focus going forward will be on climate and sustainable things. I think that sort of puts things very firmly in context as we go along. We now have probably about 10 minutes for Q&A, and I will just in a moment start this, but I already have a question which I will read out, and then I could ask either one of you to address this. The question is from Ambassador Bambawale. The question is, has globalization been negatively impacted by the COVID-19 crisis? If so, how does your bank intend to approach this problem and correct it? So has globalization been impacted by the crisis, and how would you like to correct it? Chen, would you like to address this first question?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as I mentioned, December last year, our board approved the policy of ADB's vaccine package. So 9 billion has been prepared. So now we are working with all the developing member countries there and prepare the vaccine project for them. Yeah, you're right. At this moment, it's not. I think it's not only the issue of the pricing, but maybe the issue of the supply of the vaccine would be issue there. So we do expect that the supply will picking up. I think it's vaccine supply. Its capacities increase. So some country has already received the vaccines from a different channel, as Mr. Ferro mentioned, maybe different channels to do that. And some developing countries also received from COVAX. So they have some pricing the discussion. We hope the pricing for the developing country during the supply increasing, the pricing will be fair and affordable. So this is something important for them. Yeah.
Thank you. One more question. All of panelists talked about the digital divide. Then any thoughts on how this could be looked at going ahead, even within the Asian context? I'm sure there will be this thing felt very clearly.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to say to Ambassador Bambawale's question, I think that the two are related, but I wanted to say that it's very good to hear from Ambassador Bambawale, who was here in Beijing for some time, and we were very grateful for his support and engagement with AIB while he was here. So I want to convey my greetings, even though he's not in a position to respond. I think the question about globalization and technology are closely related, because already before this crisis, globalization was changing. Technology means some production can be closer to markets. We no longer send shiploads of CDs and DVDs around the world because streaming services have taken that business away. And that's increasingly true in many sectors of the economy. But digital connectivity, I think, is a crucial part of fostering international trade, international engagement, international economic exchanges. And I think the questioner is right to focus on the digital divides, and we see, I think, two issues. One is related to the hard infrastructure, the basic telecommunications, the broadband infrastructure, the mobile telephone infrastructure, which is just singularly lacking in some parts of the world. And so investment in that kind of hard infrastructure to enable individuals to connect is in itself critically important. AIB has financed broadband in Oman, telecommunications, fiber optic in Cambodia. Very recently, a very innovative satellite technology and communications project in Indonesia, which was designed to spread online connectivity to thousands of outlying islands that previously had no such connectivity. And so I think those kind of projects, just by enabling connections, can make a huge difference. But the second part is about the soft infrastructure, and this is about technology, software, applications of digital infrastructure. Particularly where you can use technology, sensors, Internet of Things to enable the investments you're making in roads, railways, water treatment, and so on to be more effective, to reduce maintenance costs, to enable people to make better use of the services that already exist. And I think both elements are important. But I think the first step in terms of the digital divide is to spread the basic telecommunications infrastructure to those people who don't have it. But you made the point right at the start, President Kamath, that actually, there are many people in Asia who simply don't have access to electricity, let alone to telecommunications technology. And so it's a reminder of the importance of building the basic infrastructure as a key driver of economic and social development, but whether that's access to electrical power, access to telecommunications technology, to clean water. These are all fundamentals for closing the divides that exist in this world. But I think increasingly, as digital technology becomes the driver of the major driver of growth in many parts of the world, the digital divide is a crucial one to bridge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I
Last question.
Yeah, can I add
Go
one
ahead.
point? I do share with the point of the digital infrastructure. On top of that, digital divide, specifically something in poor countries and the remote areas. So for those areas, I think the digital infrastructure maybe also need more support. So this is like a remote area at this moment. Actually, kids cannot have the online classes. Yeah, so that's because of the lack of the infrastructure in those areas. So this is maybe also in our policy shaping where we need to pay more attention. Yeah, I stop here.
Last question. Chen, you mentioned, and as Ms. Ferro also did, people slipping back to poverty. We had in between 70 and 100 million people slipping back. Any thoughts on what could be the policy response to this, to get them out of poverty?
Yeah, so that's something very much important. I think we need to dig deeper in the reason why that happened. I think economic recovery, this is very much important. So we need to try our best to support the vaccination to be very equally to be like deployed. So get the back of economic recovery. So this is the first. Secondly, we need to look at like specifically in Asia, South Asia, informal sector. It's a huge part of the unemployment there, job losses there. So how can we help them, support them in terms of the fiscal policy and also the monetary policy? We still need to continue strengthen on those areas as well. Thirdly, as I mentioned before, some new non-traditional area would be helpful a lot. Digitalization has a huge potential, 1.8 trillion revenues there related to many the job opportunities, advertisement technology, transport technology, and also media platforms. So you can name it. So many areas. So this is there. And also we have to push the green growth. So how to push the green growth? The country needed the opportunity of job in those areas. So we need to look at that, what kind of green growth can help support the job opportunities there as well. So those areas, I think, is very much important for how to shape our policies.
Thank you. I think that was an excellent response. I'll just add one word to what you said. Maybe reskilling also is something we need to look at, because a whole lot of people will probably find their current skills probably not of use going forward. Again, thank you very much. I think to me, there's been an education exercise. It's been an exercise in getting myself educated on what's happening around us. I'm sure our panelists enjoyed the session. And on my behalf, I thank all three of you for staying out so late and helping us understand this subject. Thank you. Over to you, Ms. Palkar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.